Gamer 1745 here. And we're going to be playing some Hearts of Iron. I'm just checking to make sure we are live now on the interwebs. It appears to be so. Good. And hello, Arno. You are first here today for sure. And hey, Gamer's mostly on time. All right. Well, the world is continuing on. We'll talk some about that a bit later in the look at some of this later on in the stream, but let's first look here. Okay. Messerschmitt. Fighter production costs down, agility and speed max up. Falkwool. Friesler. Junkers, close air support, and ankle. I think because this actually helps with reducing production costs on fighters. That agility and max speed. Time to invade Poland. We're getting close. We're doing the Ribbentrop-Molotov pact. So let's do that. Chip designer. Okay. Now, there's a major feature. I mean, there's several features, of course, with my streams. One of them is complaining about the games that I'm playing. I hope you all enjoy my complaining. Hope it's fun. I vehemently disagree with the design choice of this game of starting out with these basically as empty. I don't see the benefit. I don't see the design choice in the game. Started out with the historical settings for each of these types of things. Whatever you best judge that they were doing in 1936. So ship designer. Maybe not submarine in 1936. Now, if you really, obviously some nation like Austria that may start out with no coastline, and if you were playing, Austrian World Conquest or something, and you get a coastline, maybe you add that later. If you look at, I don't know, a nation like Denmark, maybe they really don't have a ship design setting because they hardly have any ships or something. Okay, I can see that could be a thing, and that, or like something that's fairly new would be, aircraft design or something like that may not have a slot filled at the start, but you fill it in time. Okay, so we're not going to be doing surface fleet this playthrough anymore. Manufacturing. We're not going to be doing carriers. Capital ship screens. It's a 10% reduction in production costs, surface visibility down, all that max speed. That looks to be the super submarine choice. Loss 10%. So yeah, so we'll do this. Hey, Jemnuska, how you doing? Good to have you here. I hope life is good with you. Okay, let's see. We have noticed we've moved up forces, some of our reserves, or we're keeping this on the south just for lulls almost. Part of the army is up over here. I don't think Hungary's going to come in against us, or even Italy, but we just got some forces there. That can also be used as a good to hear. Good to hear. That can be used as a reserve. Move the rest of the forces that were sort of screening Czechoslovakia up to here now, and the most of the armor units that were up around. And I haven't done training. I'm thinking if you don't recognize what I'm doing, being quiet. That's another thing. That because the design choice, because of the supply, the system of supply for Hearts of Iron 3 had its problems. And I talked about that last week, so I'm not going to go too much into that today, because many of you were here, at least the few that are here right now at the start of the stream. Because they finally did put back in supply effects, meaning how much, in theory, how much a unit could have in supply, and then have negative effects if it doesn't have enough supply. Okay, good. Training does cost. And I don't how long ago. I mean, I know recently I gave this example, but I'll give it again for the few that are watching now, and those, and these streams do get watched later on. I do notice that a lot of people just check it out briefly, but well, some people. I don't know if anything's a lot with my channel, but really, okay. My cousin, he went into the army during the Clinton years, and he commanded a tank platoon. I forget, I could maybe say, but I forget which base it was that he was on. And it was a large base out in the Midwest, call it out, out in this part of the U.S. And, M1 Abrams. A Sherman, I think that's what it was. Or no, either this, no, I think it was the M60 tank. The M60 tank, if I remember this correctly, got 5 miles to the gallon. So 1 gallon of gasoline would get it 5 miles. I think that's what it was. And Abrams gets 5 gallons to the mile. So it is a complete gas hog. Well, their budget, when they would want to go to the firing range for their tanks, and it was I gather, a considerable distance, but it was all like on one base. So it wasn't like they were going very far. They would drive the tank carrier trucks with the trailer on it. Oh, and it would also take like about 5 gallons to start the Abrams. It's a turbine engine. It takes a lot to get it going. So they would start it up, drive it onto the trailer, turn it off, and then they would drive the tractor trailer around to where the range was, and then start the Abrams up, back it off the tractor trailer, back it off the trailer, and drive the very short distance to the firing line to do gunnery practice. Well, they did that because of budget restrictions. They had so little money for fuel. That was cheaper, and I don't think they were firing a hell of a lot, but it very likely the Army at the time had large stocks of practice rounds, so they may have not been, blue is for practice in the Army. So you see blue painted hand grenades or blue painted tank rounds. Those are for practice. Well, practiced tank round will, go right through you and 20 other people. It's not that it's not deadly. It's just it's not the more expensive actual tank killing round. And they're designed. I don't know how correct it is, but they're designed to have similar ballistics. So so they had at least some budget or some stockpiles to practice on for the main guns, but they didn't have enough, or they wanted to save the budget of gasoline. This is during the Clinton years, and during the latter Bush and Obama years, they had sequestration, which basically froze the military budget, wouldn't go up. So when they were switching units in and out of the sandbox, as it became sort of known, Afghanistan and Iraq, this is particularly aircraft units, whether it was naval, I think it was mostly Air Force. A unit would come back from being operational there, and then the unit that was going to go to operation would, I don't know if steal is the right word, take, because they knew they were doing, everybody knew that they were doing it, take parts off of the aircraft that just came back to put on the aircraft that are going to be going to keep them operational, because they didn't have the budget under sequestration to buy more parts for the aircraft, whatever they may be. These are two basic facts that I know. I'll get to the chat. I see Arno has said some stuff. I'll check that out in a moment. So training does cost. It absolutely does. The Germans, now we're into historical facts for Germany, the German soldier in peacetime had basically two uniforms. One was the wool uniform that you're sort of used to seeing in all the photos. And that was, dress might not quite cover the term, but walking out might be the term that some nations use. And that was the uniform when he would, they'd all line up for inspection and wear, and when he's let off the base, he would wear that uniform. They also had a drill uniform that I believe was cotton. Very few of them remain, and very rarely do collectors care about them, to have saved them. So they're actually quite rare, I believe. They're white cotton sort of pants and very lightweight jacket, and they're white. I think that's I'm not sure why they're white. I could say that could be an exercise so the soldiers spend a lot of time cleaning them. Self-discipline, clean your uniform, get it spotless again. But this would be their working uniform. Whether they were out, that's why I say cleaning them, crawling through the mud or doing, exercises, or doing construction work. They would wear because soldiers were often used as laborers, including farm laborers in Europe during, particularly harvest season. So, hello, Tubies. Very good. You had a good week. Yes, history, lots of history. So this was a cheaper uniform to obviously probably only like 10% of the cost of the nicer uniform. The uniform that you see them going to war in, because they wore the good uniform to go to war. So the uniform, and another historical fact, uniforms in the British Army, and I studied the British Army in the 18th century in significant detail, down to original source research. And just as an aside, original source research is not reading books. It's going and reading the period documents. People often misuse the term history. History is the study of the written word, okay? Archaeology is like study of physical objects. And there is maybe a bit of overlap there, but sometimes, that's why there's prehistory. Anything prehistory is pre-written word or written word. I still don't think we've cracked linear A. We've cracked linear B, the writing style. So in some cases, there may be written words, but we don't have good translations of, what they've written. So there's prehistory, anything before wherever you are, before the written word. So I've done, historical research on the English army of the 18th century, including original source stuff. So I know quite a bit about it. And I do know over time, especially that 100 years, it changes during that time. Practices change, things change. But it was standard that, and it changed, and it also changed periods and different regiments, but it was standard the idea that a British soldier either would get the money for, or sometimes would have the money deducted from his pay for, because again, different times. But basically, one new jacket a year. And the jacket from the previous year would be taken and then cut down into a waistcoat. A waistcoat is a smaller jacket, often, not always, but often in the period without arms, sort of like what we would think of as a vest today. And so they would cut that down and use it as a, the waistcoat that either in warmer weather you and with permission of your officers or whatever, you just wear the waistcoat, and in colder weather it was, an additional lining, or like even in sort of warmer weather, if you're going to do some entrenching or something, some sort of work, get your arms free, be a little cooler, you just wear that. So even they're talking about a jacket was going to get 2 years worth of service out. First year as the outer jacket, second year as the inner jacket. And, so even the jacket, pants would generally be consumed at a higher rate. Just, and so Germany considers the clothing that they go to war with as something of a durable good. And I know we're maybe in the weeds here. Well, if you notice on the swastika that I see in almost every single case is a, I guess, I don't know if technically a mirror image or going in, if you're talking about rotating or whatever, it's going in the opposite direction than what the Nazis used in almost every case. And so you very much but you also still see the swastika heavily used in Hindu temples of certain types. So it's still very much an Eastern thing, but it's mostly reversed. But you get the swastika in India, like you say, Tibet, in China, a little bit in Japan, and some in North America. That's really sort of strange. You virtually don't get it in Europe. I know the Nazis tried to point at certain things, but it really isn't a symbol in Europe. They tried so hard to prove that it was, but some of the stuff was entirely faked. Some of the stuff is you sort of have to squint and see it in some geometric patterns. So it would sort of kind of be more of a geometric pattern than a symbol, that conveyed a meaning. A symbol conveys a meaning. So like the peace symbol. The pseudo Volkswagen bug symbol that but the peace symbol. So when people see that, they understand the meaning of the symbol. A geometric pattern conveys no meaning. It has no meaning to it. And that's how I see the very, very few real pointable uses of something that looks sort of like a swastika in Europe. The swastika is introduced into Europe by Madame Blavatsky. I believe I'm pronouncing her name right, and the Theosophist movement. She's the one that brings it in the late 19th century, the late 1800s. She brings it into Europe. That's when it really first starts showing up there. And just because I'm a collector of digital pictures, I've saved some of the pictures. There used to, the one of the American divisions, just up until the start of World War II, its divisional symbol was a blue swastika, because it's connected not with Madame Blavatsky or other good luck symbols. It was one of the American Indian symbols that was used. And there's up in Canada there was it was called swastika laundry, and again it's referencing the American Indians kind of stuff, because if you look at some of our states are named after American Indian tribes. A lot of our cars, like Pontiac, is I think an actual Indian's name, not a tribe name, but maybe it's a tribe name. But there's a bunch of other car names that were Indian tribe names and such. So we, more than people think, we over the 19th and 20th century, we here in North America have honored the American Indian more so than a lot of people. I believe I saw used on Shield Rome Histasi pre-infantry Rome Total War. Yeah, like I say, I think it's just a geometric pattern. I don't think it's when people saw it, either thought because it does show up during World War I in the German army as a good luck symbol. I don't think it has any conveyable meaning other than just simply a pattern. But it is interesting that it is not a pattern. In India, Tibet, China, possibly some other Asian nations that are Buddhist and whatnot, but I just don't know them well enough. But definitely in India, Tibet, China, Japan, all have it as a Hindu or Buddhist based symbol. And then in North America, and whether it just locally developed, or somehow there was contact. I don't know. But that's definitely it. Okay. So get back to my earlier look at. I have a few, not a lot. Well, I have a bunch of guns, but a few German rifles of World War I and World War II era. The Gewehr 98 and K98K, just a few. But you look at those things, and they're built as if they are truly a durable good, meaning they're built to be used for 20 or 30 years by German soldiers, an individual gun. German tanks through this whole period were always built as a durable good, not as a consumable good. A artillery piece is built as a durable good that will wear out, particularly the barrel if you shoot it a lot, but that you would replace the barrel, or in some more modern guns, barrel linings. So this is one thing I'm just really reluctant to do. Is train with some of these units, because these, Panzer 1s and Panzer 4s, yeah, you drive them around, you're going to need to do maintenance on them. But quite honestly, they're not going to need lots and lots of spare parts. Maybe a little, yeah. Trucks, yeah, they're gonna last quite some time here. So I've always found this to be a bad system to replicate World War II, in that my training costs equipment. Armies at war, and I will get back to some of the other chats here. Armies at war definitely consume things, because people are dying, and stuff is, I'm just trying to think how to use, stuff is just, and whether it's, your tank or the fence you just drove through or whatever it might be, stuff just gets consumed, often for time, not always for because it's damaged. I forget which general it was, but there was one general that some, researchers were researching around, was noted because his unit would send back the baskets, an artillery piece, or not an artillery piece, an artillery round, the projectile that's fired there in the German army would generally come in a woven basket. Okay, so it's depending on the type, it could be, light branches kind of thing, wood, or it could be, sort of straw type stuff. It would come in this basket that there were factories just making these baskets to hold the different rounds. It would come in that basket, and then they would take it out of the basket and shoot it. Well, one general in his unit was noted particularly would return the baskets, and this was during fighting on the East Front or wherever, that they'd take the time in a significant number, and it was really appreciated because it saved production on that for them, where most of the commands would just throw that away as a consumable piece. And it wasn't that these baskets weren't reusable. It wasn't that the German army and the German system didn't care about the basket. It's just, do you, as you're operating and moving your artillery unit around and firing it, do you take the time to, on your truck or wagon, load up the empty baskets and take them back to the supply dump, and probably very quickly, relatively speaking, but take them off, because the truck or the wagon has to go back for more. The Germans used lots and lots of wagons, so I want to emphasize that. So the truck's got to go back anyways, and the baskets are relatively light, so they're not going to significantly burn up any more fuel driving back. Loaded with baskets. Now, of course, the trucks may be driving back with wounded soldiers, not maybe so much from the artillery unit, but other, local infantry units, or, there may be other important things to use the truck for, going back to supply depots and support supply chain systems kind of thing. But if it wasn't, just take that time, load the truck up, take the time, offload the truck of the baskets. And then, of course, the trains have got to go back. So I'm presuming this is going to a train railhead. The trains have got to go back anyways to Germany. You might as well fill them up with the baskets on the train cars. So, you got to unload, got to get the piles of empty baskets, load them onto the train, send it back. So it's going to take effort to reuse these baskets. And you got to seriously question, is it worth the effort? I don't know how much branches they're collecting around Germany. Now, of course, there are, things like rifle stocks. They're cutting down trees and whatnot. There's a whole systematic forestry in Britain, I know. Mostly, a lot of it's done by women that are cutting down trees, but are going around. There's certain experienced people, both men and women, would know what trees to mark, and they would cut, to go into the woods and cut those down for the particular needs of, because the mosquito was built out of wood. There's lots of wood used in all kinds of things, as well as, rifle stocks. So they knew what they were needing to cut down, so they would, go mark the trees, and then the other women would come in and cut down the trees. And they also knew how to, they got trained on how to cut them down. But it's also not just for the main trunk, but things like the branches, to use them to make things like baskets, in Britain. So I presume, I just haven't read about this operation in Germany, but I presume a similar operation is going on in Germany. So when you cut a tree down, there's lots of branches that can be woven into baskets, and so I'm sure that even without, specifically needing to go find branches of the suitable type to make baskets, they were already sort of creating this as a byproduct. And then, of course, you need people at the time to weave these baskets. Right. So it's useful to get them reused, but is it truly useful amount for manpower in the logistics train to, and then again, of course, when the train gets back to wherever it is, it gets unloaded, and then wherever that's unloaded, it may need to be transferred to wherever the artillery factory is, so you can see that there can be a lot of effort moving these baskets around to get them back. And I honestly don't know which is better, just to make new baskets or to reuse them. Now, something like for the U.S., or even I would say for Britain, I would say the answer is no, because you're adding in ships and whatnot to the whole thing. So, you can, oh yes, Monty sending his baskets back to Cairo or well, no, it would be Alexandria or wherever, to be put onto a ship to then be, sailed around Africa and whatnot. No, it's probably not worth it for them to do that. But, so things get consumed in war. And I will agree that, whether it's ammunition or other costs for training. And some armies just don't have, to this very day, I'm looking at you, NATO, don't train much. because of the cost. Trust me, soldiers like to shoot their guns. Many soldiers like to, because they're young, whatever, like to go run around in the fields and, camping and play soldier, if you will. And I only mean play soldier. I'm not in the sense that it's not actually going and fighting, just going out and, doing maneuvers and such. It does cost, but I just don't like the idea of consuming equipment. Okay, let's get back to what Arno. Okay, don't forget to use your naval bombers in the North Sea to protect your northwestern coastline against invasion. Yes, that is very important. Okay, so we are getting ready. And let's take a look at our current logistics supply of naval bombers. Okay, so we have 170 naval bombers not currently in service. Okay, so there's a squadron of 100 there over here with a squadron of 100 fighters and a squadron of 100 there. Back out here in Königsberg, those are just fighters. We will do the air operations. Okay, so we have an extra 100. Someday we may go north. I think, though, let's come back over to this air base and we will create another squadron. And we will think I'm going to leave the other 70 as replacements for the moment. All right, now, okay, so let's look over here at close support. Okay, we have almost 400. So let's come up here and create a squadron of close support. Interwar close support, which they're using the duck. Okay, and oh, saying so too much. No. Let's get that here. You go here. Create another squadron there in Königsberg for them. I really, really wish they. Again, do you want to hear me rant about state mechanics that I hate? Probably not. Who's doing that? I guess here we're going to put 2 here. They'll fill them up with some other interwar units. Okay, now for fighters, 700. So we've got lots of fighters. At least I think that's lots of fighters. We'll see how it goes. And yeah, for training, certainly you would have an amount of crashes, and aircraft probably consumes more spare parts. Just need replacing. Get already over strength. Okay, so no more there. We're gonna to there. I should have moved it south, but okay. Yeah, here then. And we'll come up here and let that fill either with other older models or replacements. So there's a bunch of older models. What about with the some tactical bombers over here? Maybe we should update those. Okay, what are we producing? Are we producing any tactical bombers? Basic airframe, yes. Okay, so we're producing. I don't want to create a variant, but okay, we're producing something that at least says HE-111 and sort of looks like it. That's okay. That's all right. So we've got some of our air deployed there. So maybe a good idea, Arno says, to send in some BF-110 escorts for the naval bombers. Well, are we even producing any of those? No, we're not even producing any of those, Arno. That may be a thing to produce because it would be a good idea if I have any, but I don't even have any of those to produce. Our research has been lacking, apparently. We're doing improved small airframe right now. Yeah, this game isn't going down to that level of detail here. I am. We'll see how far I get with this playthrough. Everyone, I know that been around. This was last moment. I am very much considering another playthrough with the vanilla game before I start looking at any mods. So, once I relearned, which I'm relearning more and more now, what's going on. Yeah. The escort range edition is nice for sure. I want to look. Um, Maybe it's more the mods I was playing, but there was an event. Well, I know a national focus to build to build the defensive, the um, west wall. Otterbahn, right? Establish the Reichsworks. Um, I thought maybe just because with some of the mods, I thought there was a no, I know there was something to do the west wall here. I'm not seeing it. What did um, for some reason I'm not seeing it. Oh, here it is. Fortify Winterland, right. Okay, so just the one thing here, there is no national focus to build a anti-air operations here. So do this. We'll see how long this takes to build. Well, I'm definitely going to, for a while, we'll see how the war goes. We'll see if my combination of building program and training program has been enough. Well, I may get my butt kicked. To join Legionary Romania. We will accept Legionary Romania as a ally. Definitely want Hungary. We already have Slovakia. I definitely want Hungary, and we just got Romania in as allies. We are in the midst of 1940, so I don't know if I want to try to do these right away. Don't know so much. Okay, 1940 medium tank. Get that researching there. Okay, Ribbentrop-Molotov pact just got completed. Ah, come on. Right here, treaty with USSR. I don't know that we want to do that just yet. Notice they get see now here. I've been talking about how Germany gives the steel rolling capabilities to the Soviet Union that that they could not have done at the time on their own. And I can see here, just looking at one of the effects for the Soviets, is they create heavy tank KV-1 heavy tank variants. So even they have very much recognized what's going on. Okay. Danzig for Slovakia. No. Reassert Eastern claims. We need to do that to get Danziger War. So let's do this. Oh, we've done this. Why isn't it letting me do this? Huh? Oh, at least. Oh, not enough men. Okay. I understand that. Is it here? Yes. Okay. Army right now in the field, we have almost 900,000. So we have enough in training. So adding more units to the training queue won't get that any faster. We can maybe, when units get a little more trained here. And I do like this element of, we've been talking about training. I do like this element here of training. What I would do is get rid of on-map training entirely from the game. Where you hit this and say train your troops and whatnot. I would get rid of that entirely. I would move it to here. And I would do it in two ways. One, how long this unit takes to get trained. And two, and one thing we haven't done yet is we'll look at some of these here, is some of the, like Spirit of the Army and whatnot that would affect how well a unit is trained. So I would change it from on-map units to here. Okay, let's look at this. Does anybody have any suggestions? Elevated Engineer Corps, Entrenchment, Railway Gun Bombardment Engineer Company Design Unit Cost down. Okay. State serves the military. This seems very sort of Prussian. And Japan. Motorized drive. Let's see, experience gain from combat, infantry unit, in cost. Accomplished heritage grant or medal grant cost down, but field officer divisional penalty minus that. And also give people time to answer if they wish to. What Spirit of the Academy, incentive leadership, embrace the future, professional officer corps, political loyalty, probably won't do that one, tenacious defense, don't want to do that one just yet, and of course Spirit of Division Command, aggressive reconnaissance, flexible organization, maneuver warfare, quick improvisation, planning speed. Okay, I'm not going to be doing planning speed. Daily command power increase. Commander abilities cost down that. Okay, down 20%. Division speed up by 5%. Coordination by 5%. Additional unexpected thrust tactic is preferred tactic plus 100. Flexible division speed, organization loss while moving, preferred tactics. I like these two the best so far. Reconnaissance organization. Anybody want to chime in with any suggestions here? I would gladly take them. Reconnaissance, intelligence gained from combat, preferred infiltration tactic. Okay, well, nobody's giving me advice. There are some people here, I see. Okay. Maneuver. Hello, spiraling. Maneuver warfare is what you're suggesting. Division, speed, coordination. Okay, we will do maneuver warfare. Bold attack, no. New professional officer corps. And that's all right, spiraling. People want to lurk, that's fine. I do that often for live streams that I watch. Because I'm often, working on something else while having it on. But of course, I try to engage. So we'll do motorization driving. there. Let's come down and look at the Air Force here, because we also have some Air Force points that we get. Research speed, I don't know that I want to do that. But air wing training experience gain. Air crew surveys. Dependent Air Force, Air Wiser cost. Yes, I should have done these earlier. Lighter detection, air emission efficiency up. I like that. Okay, we'll do this. We'll do that. For the Navy, since we have the points. Submarine primacy, that's definite. That's what we're looking at. Convoy warfare, blockade running, fleet, signals training. Grades. Well, and combat surface raiders. Screen penetration and torpedo screen penetration, close combat. Do that. Okay, so we can do that. And for our military high command, well, currently we have Werner von Fritsch, which would have been dismissed by now, and Schroner. Army regrouping division recovery. Well, we have but a few armored divisions, like historically, but that is probably where we should go. And theorist. Darian, max speed. I'm a fan of Guderian. So, well, it's going to probably be 30 days or more. I know we're already in June 40. They're only at or establish the Africa Corps. Doing that this playthrough. At war. Trade interdiction. Let's do that. Moscow Science Pack. Excellent. Naval lineage, superior tactician. Other option units here. The same one twice, or is it just probably did? Looking for submarines. Oh, they're all under donuts is coming. Oh, okay. So, um, Arnold. Oh no, that's Raider. Yes. Hmm. Hello. Ah, how do we? BD Pulls? Yes, it's been a while. Good. I don't remember the screen name. Maybe you were under a different one, or my memory's faulty. I don't know. But good to have you here. Um, I play with the Navy so little. Okay, we want to attach these guys to these guys. Is what I want to do. It's going to merge them all into one. Yes, it's going to merge them all into one. Now, it's not entirely what I want to do is um, this in half, this in half. Um, C zones and things. Let's split this one in half. 8 and 7. There we go. There we go. Something ready to do some, coastal raiding. Hungary seeks to join the Axis. Yeah, that's just what I was looking to do. That's most of the allies that I want. Maybe or Finland or something, but okay. Improve small airplane. Improve medium airplane. here and look and see our here. This it's a close air support will do. Improve close air support. Let's see how, because we're fully, well, nearly fully trained up with the factories. Now, okay, go down to half, which reduces our current production capabilities, but still. Using the neglect of German Navy as well, I wonder if you focused on making a very large number of subs, would that make much of a difference against the UK and US? Okay. And I'm talking right now in terms of my understanding of Hearts of Iron 4. Not so much real world. You have these naval, building factories, shipyards, or whatever you want to call them. Yes. And in reality, it's not just the shipyards. Shipyards weren't producing the engines. When Germany does establish some fortified, mostly bomb-proof shipyards for submarines down in this part, it's more down Lorient and Nantes than so much Brest, but down in here, those are assembly locations, meaning the diesel engines, the torpedo tubes, the periscopes, all the parts are made in some factory back here in Germany and are shipped, or put on trains to here and then assembled here. So there, and there is a certain amount of forming steel, bending steel and whatnot that I think would be taking place definitely in some of the bigger shipyards, taking place at the shipyards themselves, but a lot of the components would be made elsewhere. But this is the way the game is organized. So you can build more of the shipyards. Now the question is should you do that and not build more military factories? Or, of course, you can build other things too, but I'm looking at factory production now here for Germany. It's different for Britain. It's different for the US. Realistically, nobody's invading the US. So the US, and part of the way to keep it such, is to have lots of ships. Basically have 100 carriers by the end of the war. That kind of thing. So it's different for other navies. And then Italy's different because it's, Mediterranean focus. Germany. Game terms. You might as well use the factories you have here unless you have a resource problem. We can see here this takes steel, this takes steel. So Germany has to have a steel deficit for you not to want to build one of these things. Now, if I were to come over here, are these just, okay, yeah. So I wanted to see some chromium, was nothing else. I was wondering if there's tungsten or something. So some chromium might be needed for some ship models currently here. So you might as well use the factories. Now, if you've played a certain version of the game, whether it's like this version right now that I have, or a certain mod, 10 times or something as Germany, and you really sort of know what you need, you might want to build a few more destroyers. Now if you're looking at a longer term game, to 1950 and Germany's doing well, and you are looking at trying to invade the U.S., or you're looking at wanting to, as Germany, wanting to go help Japan or something like that, later in the game, you might start building some more ships. But starting out, I wouldn't. I don't see it as useful. Basically, unless you get some ships into the Mediterranean, which you can do if you've allied with Italy early enough. Get some German ships here. Basically, your ships are limited to this part of the world. Yes, if you're planning an invasion of Britain, some surface ships would be very useful. Obviously, trying to invade Norway, some surface ships are useful. Now we start out where we, complete building some of them. Germany kept building things, obviously kept building some big battleships and whatnot. They never completed their carrier, but, the Graf Zeppelin. But Germany loses the war. Germany could have won the war. It's quite possible they could have won the war. So if you're looking at, this war game, playing it out, I would probably not focus on doing too much ships. Submarines, since you have them, and I'm also, we're producing convoys, so that we can take losses. That's what the convoys and do supply. So I just wouldn't go for very much naval stuff. Germans wanted to do with submarine warfare, but 10 times that effort. Well, the concept, as I understand it, was sort of, and I know these are artificial numbers in that they have no specific relation to a particular, thought out plan, but the number I've heard thrown around was they wanted 100 submarines. I don't know exactly where that number comes from. I'm not saying it's incorrect. I just don't know that that is what they were thinking. And you got to understand, part of that is these, okay, well, I guess they're all the submarines here. But some of the smaller coastal subs that Germany had, that are just, sort of for training. They were used in the Baltic. They would, early on and whatnot, would go after, like, Soviet ships. But they were training submarines, and you need those. You can't have all submarines all at once for long periods of time out operationally. Obviously, for, the war starts, every submarine ready to go can either be already deployed or being deployed early on. But you got to bring them back and rotate them through. And so if you're trying to starve out Britain, or the other thing you can do is look at resources, manpower, industrial capability, and now with submarines you do have the idea that everybody's dying if the submarine gets sunk. But short of that, if you're just looking at the military calculus, if you're, say, Germany, and you're putting in 100 units of effort, and you're forcing the Allies to put in 500 units of effort to oppose that, well, that's a good trade-off strategically. And I'm saying, I'm just sort of made this up, units of effort that could, like I say, manpower, industrial capacity, fuel, all those types of things. So if you're making, whether it's an AI player or a human player, or in real world, if you're making them produce a lot of escorts that are escorting convoys just to keep the industry flowing for Britain and America and whatnot, and we're not even talking about supplying, which was also additionally supplying forces across the seas, but just industrial capacity around, that if they have to do all that effort, which Britain does a lot, America does even more, huge amounts of effort to keep their sea lanes open and functioning. So it's worth Germany putting in effort as opposed to just completely ignoring it, because then they can concentrate more effort on the air war and the ground war. And just the naval war could just be that, if they know that there's no submarines out there, no submarines operating, no whatever, they might just put a few escorts, just in case things change, kind of thing. But you don't have to do much escorts. So most of the Navy becomes, at least here for the Atlantic, the tip of the spear, controlling a sea zone, getting ready for an invasion, shore bombardment when there is an invasion, and things like that. So it's just tip of the spear kind of stuff. So doing some Navy, I think, is quite worth it for Germany. It just comes down to, is it worth diverting otherwise resources away from more important things? And Arno says, can you now ask Hungary for troops which you can defend, say, northwestern? I don't know that I'm going to ask for Hungarian troops at this moment, Arno. We might at some time. Cleaning up their unit here. This has 3 battalions of tanks and 3 battalions of motorized infantry. No artillery support. These have 12, so they have artillery with there. This has motorized infantry and 1 artillery. So they got artillery, no anti-tank. Now, let's look at our division. We have anti-tank, we have reconnaissance, we have artillery, we have engineers. We've got a triangle division is what it's called. I had to think for a moment to get that term up, but yeah, triangle division. Basically 3 brigades or regiments, however you want to look at that, in each one of 3 battalions. And the way these are designed to operate in the real world is 2 battalions fight, 1 battalion in the reserve, either to be moved to block an enemy attack, or if there is a successful attack, to be thrown in and exploit the success. And if you're just sort of somewhere in limbo between those two, you're rotating between the 3 brigades so that they get a certain amount of rest, repair, whatnot, resupplied, that kind of thing. So I think they wanted 100 subs deployed at the time, which means needs 300. No, I think the goal was to have 100 submarines. That's what I think. I'm not saying you're wrong. Dutovlich, been a while, but if you know, you know. I'm sorry if I'm questioning what you know, but I thought it was just to have, because they only have about 30 submarines at the beginning in 1939. They wanted 100, is my understanding. Italy wants to join our faction. They do not get to. I'm going to try to see how this war, if I can, without a Mediterranean front happens. Okay, trade interdiction. Can we now? I don't think so, but Danziger War, right. 950, we currently have the same sort of number. You. They're getting stronger and stronger and stronger. We could do a war with the Soviet Union, but we can't do a war with Poland. How interesting. Which to me, I think this shows how bad this national focus tree is. Uh, hmm. We want to wait because we want to get Gdynia and Danzig and some of those others in Germany. I think that we could do this. We'll do this. But you're absolutely right in needing, if you're going to continuously have 100 submarines at sea, you've got to have a rotation. I don't know if you need a 1/3 rotation in wartime. And sorry, I'm not the greatest expert on the Kriegsmarine in World War II and their capabilities. From what I have read, for the U.S., they were willing to, for surface warfare ships, go all in until a ship was ready to fall apart. Not like peacetime United States, now and even during, the Cold War. It's a 1/3 rotation, 1/3 out at sea, 1/3 of the ships sort of going through maintenance cycles with the crews getting time off, and 1/3 of the ships deployed as training operations to, coming back from their time off and getting worked up. But during the war, the U.S. was all in. Now, submarines, it's been a long time since I've watched it, but probably the best submarine movie for Germany, probably, I'm sure it is Das U-Boat. That is a great movie for German submarines. It has very, very little to do with, say, the American submarines. And in many ways, it's sort of a fantasy movie, but in many ways, it's really good. I would go with one of the best, if not the best, is Destination Tokyo for the American experience on submarines. Because you see and I think it's very accurate, you see the Germans in their U-boat after being at sea, they're just covered in grime, sort of oily grime because they haven't, bathed in however long. Their food's getting bad. It's just really bad. Where the Americans, and there's a very good channel that's the best channel to my knowledge, on submarines, and particularly American submarines, life aboard and whatnot, is USS Cod, and it's the channel is produced by USS Cod, the memorial ship that is maintained as a museum. And they're going into, recently they were looking at actually getting the all of the cooking, the kitchen working again, and rehooking it up to the the gas system to heat and whatnot, actually making it all modern, functional. And they've even got their torpedo computer up and running again, so that if they had torpedoes and they had the ability, they could actually fire a torpedo and have it go hit the shipwright and doing all that stuff. So they've been doing a lot of that things. But they talk about, for the American submariner, and like the Cod actually, I think, is the one that rescued a Dutch submarine out here somewhere. Late in war, 44, 45, somewhere in there. Well, maybe even 43, but somewhere. A Dutch submarine runs aground out on one of the sort of, occasional islands, that are sort of, come up on, low tide, they get exposed, they go down. And so it's stuck out there, and they call the Americans, an American submarine. I think it's Cod that comes and gets them aboard. And the Dutch submariners are just amazed at the American submarine that they're now on. Because the American submarine, it's air conditioned. May not be very well air conditioned, but it's air conditioned. They got an air conditioner on board. The sort of technical excuse is we want to keep the electronics cool, but they're also keeping the crew cool. They've got showers on board, to the point that every crew member gets a shower at least every 3 days, about it is. The cooks, and there's generally like 2 cooks on board, only one cooking at a time because it's so small, the kitchen. But the cooks will get a shower every day because since they're preparing and handling the food, they want to keep them clean. They have a washing machine on board the submarine. And they get to wash their clothes with fresh water. Now, some of this goes away once they guppyize, that's what they call it, guppyize the submarines. They take the World War II Baleo class and the which Cod is not the Baleo. Baleo is the later one. Oh boy, I'm blanking on the name. I know it, but I'm just blanking on it. And they turn it. They put snorkels on it and make it. Get rid of the deck guns and try to make it out. They have to. In doing that, they have to reduce down one of the freshwater stills. Salt to fresh water. But while they're and they spend much more time under the water, so they can't run the engines as much. But while during World War II, so they have showers, they have, they get to wash their clothes periodically in fresh water. They have an ice cream machine on board all of the submarines, and to the point at one submarine it is ordered out early, and they have no ice cream on board. So they radio, hey man, because there's no ice cream at the port. We don't have ice cream. We're going to war. Bring us ice cream. So they literally get something, a PBY, I think it's a PBY, but one of the aircraft, go up and meet the submarine at a sort of more forward base, because they were able to fly in some of the ice cream makings. And they don't know how much to bring, so they bring way too much. But they quickly offload it. The submarine gets all that they can, and it's sort of stored down. And you have to actually, it's sort of in a liquid cream that's maintained, and then they have the ice cream maker on the sort of like soft serve ice cream maker on board the ship to make the ice cream. So they end up, a bunch of it just floats away because they bring them too much. But so yeah, American submariners get ice cream on their on their submarine as they're out there. And if it's the big question is do you go home because you've run out of torpedoes, or you go home because you've run out of ice cream, and that kind of thing. And the Americans have a very large freezer down in their ship for frozen foods, so they're able to freeze a lot of meat and whatnot, not just canned meat and canned vegetables and other canned food. Now they're putting as much as that they can on board the ship as well, or the submarine. But, so the American submariners are able to stay at sea longer, are able to have better morale and whatnot longer than just about anybody else at the time. But, like with the Germans, it's not so much, the rotation of, like we're talking with the Americans, for the surface warfare ships, they just go to sea. The destroyer, the battleship, the whatever, they go to sea and they don't come back until they're damaged or they need supplies. And the Americans are the best to this day. And Britain barely even thought about it. Because Britain has bases everywhere. So Britain trains and designed their ships to be resupplied in ports, because they got ports all over the world. The Americans have some ports around at the starting of it, Guam, the Philippines, but the Philippines and Guam are lost pretty early on. So the Americans are already in World War I training with underway replenishment. Right now, because the U.S. has 3 carriers in our continuing conflict with Iran deployed right now. The Nimitz was scheduled to be decommissioned. Decommissioned isn't quite the same as being broken up and whatever. They'll normally, and I don't know specifically with the Nimitz, normally they'll decommission the ship. So and they'll put it in mothballs. So in case somehow, like let's say in the modern day sense, Iran is able to have some stealth drones and they fire and they successfully sink a U.S. aircraft carrier or 2. Doesn't necessarily mean that everybody dies and whatnot. It just means, oh, hey, we've got too many holes, we're going down, abandoned ship and whatnot. So in theory, something can happen to one of our carriers. And we go, hey, it's quicker to get a ship out of mothballs than it is to build a new one. It's going to still take 6 months, a year, I don't know, getting something out of mothballs. So the Nimitz was scheduled for decommissioning right about now, but it's been given another year's extension because it's operating in the Caribbean. Wonder what's going to be doing in the Caribbean. Well, number 1, I would say Cuba. Number 2, the I forget his name, the leftist leader of Colombia is supposedly being investigated by U.S. forces, I think, for, facilitating the drug trade. He might get the, 2 a.m. all expense paid trip to a New York courtroom that Maduro got, or something like that. So we may be seeing that. So we're increasing our effective carriers by 1 for at least 1 more year, and we'll see what the world. And that year extension doesn't mean that it's for sure going to be decommissioned at that time. It very well may keep operating. So the Americans are able to resupply just about everything they need for the ships. And I say just about everything. If you're talking like a battleship, there really, to my knowledge, is no functional ability to resupply the large caliber shells that they're shooting, whether they're, 16-inch shells or whatever the battleships may be, depend. Some of the older ones have smaller, because like the Texas and whatnot, smaller, big main guns. And even some of the 5-inch shells, they're pretty heavy and moving them around. Now those are only consumed, or the 16-inch shells are only consumed in shore bombardments, really. So they sort of kind of know when they're running out of that. But so they're only going back to port to get things they can't resupply at sea. And so they're keeping it, so they're only going back to get resupply when needed and basically wartime damage, because some of the ships do take in Europe, in the Pacific, do take serious hits, including and are sunk. Particularly in the Pacific with kamikaze attacks, and so they're going back for those kind of maintenance. And yes, especially early on in the Pacific War, under Nimitz, the fleet does often come back to Pearl Harbor because they're working up their supplies, their continuous supply system still. And so when they're back, they do do other maintenance, but it's sort of all in the way the U.S. Navy fights the war. But the submarines are much more rotational. They look at it very much as a patrol. They do have the ability to resupply at sea for the submarines, and they do that, but not a lot. Not a lot. It just isn't needed, and they do. The Germans do more resupply at sea with their milk cows, and keeping big fat submarines that are not offensive submarines. They come out here and resupply the Germans out here, so they do that. I know I've been talking. Let's check the thing. That was 019. Yes, Arno, good. I figured you would probably have heard of it. Hello, WS36JL. I'll just call you WS, I guess. Wow, haven't watched you in a while. Live, nice to see. Yeah, great. Talking about the current affairs. I see. I do that too, as well as talk about history, because it's to be all connected. It's battleships. I don't think there are any more Arleigh Burkes use 5-inch. Well, the United States still has 3 working battleships. And Battleship New Jersey has the best YouTube channel. And they've talked about it, and it's a museum ship, but the curator of it, who sort of is the main face on the channel for that, and he does a very good job. They have to sort of maintain it in a certain level of functionality if the United States wants to reactivate it. And we still supposedly have a stockpile of 16-inch shells for it, though that may be. There's been discussion. What was it? Was it the Wisconsin that had the barrel blow up the turret? There was a lot of. Was it sabotage by a possibly gay sailor who was mad at the world or whatever and did that? And that may be what happened, or it may be the old bags of powder, which aren't powder, but they're large, big pellets that are bags of big pellets that are just you'd hold one in your fist kind of thing. Big pellets, not little powder, that may have been mishandled in its long storage since World War II or since the 50s or whatever, when they built most of the bags of powder. And so we still have a bunch of those in storage, both the powder shots, the bags of powder, and the projectiles. We could put 3 battleships back functioning. Now, it would probably take 6 months to a year at minimum to get them properly functional. But so the U.S. still sort of maintains 2 or 3 battleships. You live about 10 miles from the New Jersey. Well, very cool, Spyro. I'd love to go see that ship someday. I'm out here in Arizona right now. It's where I've moved to, where my secret mountain base is. Somewhere here, somewhere in the mountains. There's mountains in the south. Most of them are here. Some up in the north. But somewhere in these mountains, I live in a relatively small town. Could be tiny, could be sort of biggish, small, but something small town. Don't want to dox myself more than that at the moment. But I'm no longer living in the LA area. That's where I had lived before. But yes, so the New Jersey can be brought back out to function, where, like the battleship Texas, which has is another somewhat online ship. In some vague theory thing, it could be done, but so much of it's been pulled, it's not anywhere near functional. So, and that's I think pre-World War I battleship. that was used heavily in World War II and upgraded, mostly as a shore bombardment ship. Oh, much cheaper living out here in Arizona, but many factors, including 2 years ago now, my dad died, and I inherited his house here and whatnot. So, and I was already sort of planning on moving to Arizona anyways. And the gun laws are much freer here and things like that. So there's a lot of reasons, but expense is part of it. Expense, I would say, is about 20% of the reason I moved to Arizona. Okay. Okay, this is List. Wilhelm von List. Let's move him up to here. So yes, I'm enjoying living out here. Quite honestly, LA more and more has become unlivable. Okay, he can take one more division before he's overly done. Oh no, I thought I was putting him in with this guy. Oh, I guess I am. It just looked a little different color. Okay, and put this division up here maybe. So yes. So from a strategic perspective, it is a good idea for Germany, either historical or today, to do the submarine warfare. Great thing about the USA is it's large enough to ignore things happening elsewhere because the USA cities seem to be all mismanaged. Yes. Kathy Hochul. She is the governor of, which I'm sure some of you know because you may be like spiraling, lives in a state next to hers, knows who she is, but I know I'm talking about an international audience. In like late 2024, she gets up and makes a speech basically saying, all you right wingers or all you, Trump people, get out of our state. You don't belong here. Your values are not our values. Move to Florida. Well, in the last 48 hours or so, maybe a little bit longer than that, but very recently, she was on TV in an interview. Oh, rich people, come back to New York. We've got to have a plan somewhere between all of what we want to do and what we can really actually afford to do, because the tax base, because we need to find that right balance, because yes, we're leftists, we're communists, of course we're communists, everybody, don't worry, voters of New York City, I'm a communist too, basically she's saying. But the reality is that we need rich people to pay the taxes so that we can do our communist policies. And if you think she's not a communist, I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell to you. Okay? Now, she's not probably a revolutionary communist, meaning she doesn't want to get a Molotov cocktail and go throw it at the government. She's sort of, a Fabian type, wants to just incrementalize, 1% a year, 1% a year, 1% a year, and in 100 years we'll have communism or some sort of leftist type thing. And so it's just something like I don't know, was it just 6 or 20 or something? Some small number of billionaires have moved out of California and whatnot, and they've lost like 20% of their tax base or something like, I forget, probably not that much. But some massive amount. have moved out because California is taxing them too much. And they can move to Nevada, which has 0% income tax. I repeat that again, 0% income tax for private. Corporations have to pay it, but private don't. So yeah, the Democrats run up taxes, run up regulations in the cities, and then everything that makes money, whether, in my move between here and California, and I had to go back just literally for just a day a couple of weeks ago, so I drive back and forth, drive by some of these big Amazon centers and others, but big, distribution centers. And they're not inside LA County. I mean, they're in California because there's so many customers in Southern California that they're needed there. But they just can't afford to be in LA County, or particularly LA City even, or it's even worse. So they're all out in Riverside and other sort of outer area counties, and often outside of city limits even from there, so they don't have city government taxes to worry about. And so they just drive everything that makes money away. So much of California was, and particularly because of World War II, an massive industrial center. Not heavy industry as in like building large steel things. Well, they did build lots of ships in World War II. But, and they did keep that up for a number of years. But they had a huge aerospace industry, building all those Boeing and Douglas aircraft, airline planes and all that stuff. That's all gone. All gone. A lot of it moved up to Washington State, and now from there they're moving it to the South because Washington, of course, had gone mentally left. I mean, crazy left. It's just all gone. They maintain some large maintenance facilities for aircraft, particularly at Long Beach Airport and the sort of the old Douglas plant there, but they're not producing anything. They fly in jets to have them serious levels of maintenance, engine checks, maybe swap out one engine for another engine or something, some serious work on the aircraft, just because it's, near a major aircraft hub of LAX and Orange County airports, which are both much larger. And so, there is some stuff there. A friend of mine who had worked there and was like in the last 3 years of his, I think 40 years to put in working for whatever it was for retirement, they moved his job to Washington State, and he goes, I'm moving. They don't get to, because they would have loved him to quit, because then he would not have got his pension, which was very significant. And his job was quality assurance on elements of aircraft, commercial aircraft. Make sure all the bolts are in or whatever. I don't know the details of his job, and he was a very careful and methodical person who did things that way. And so he was one of the people making sure your airplane wasn't going to fall apart. Oh, and he was a white male, so he probably years later. I mean, this I knew him 15 or more years ago because he moved to Washington State. Because he only had 3 years to go, and then he was going to figure out where he was going to go live after that. But they probably replaced him with a disabled black woman who's blind. That's probably her disability, who's going to do the quality assurance. So have fun flying now, because DEI. Okay, the freedom of the states movement is certainly a boon to the resilience of the USA and her citizens and nation, but does that also impede national plans. Fighting World War II was quite a national endeavor. I don't think it impeded at all. I think that was 27 reduction. Yeah. Oh yeah, you're right. Dutovlich. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm not trying to mispronounce your name, but it's yeah. So they asked him to move, knowing he would quit to not pay his pension. Well, I think it was a combination of hoping he wouldn't move and moving his job to Washington State. Weren't quite shutting down the factory that he was working at, but instead of letting him do something else, because there was still jobs to be had more locally to him. I don't know how close or how much of the jobs. I'm gonna have to get something to drink here in a moment. How much jobs locally to him that would have fit his job skill of quality assurance. So he was, and it was. I don't know exactly all the details, whether how much it was engines versus airframes versus electronics, but he was the guy that was going after the job was supposedly done, and or maybe at certain stages, depending on as access might be closed up, going in and making sure that the job had been done right. So he wasn't doing the job; he was making sure the job had been done right. And so I don't know quite how if there were going to be other jobs that he could still have done with his skill set within the within Boeing, but officially his job was moved, and they would pay for a certain amount of his relocation up to Washington State, but they were hoping he wouldn't move because it's moving. But okay, I got to grab another drink here, and I'll be right back. Just keep my voice going. And this was back before California had fully decided to commit suicide. Okay, good. Now, okay, don't have an easy way to dig it up and look at it, but an infographic that I've saved that was made back during World War II. And particularly early in the war for America. And it was how how the War Department, and it was called the War Department back then, viewed America. And America was viewed mostly as this. And it was sort of, it had all the states on it, and basically as squares or rectangles or whatever. And size prepared. So this area was huge. This area almost didn't exist. This area was sort of there. And this is, because that was sort of industry and as well as population centers for, drafting people and whatnot. This very much was the industrial heartland of America. Again, the Democrats have ruined it, and this is becoming the industrial heartland of America. The big change here is air conditioning inside of buildings before no air conditioning. So this is just too hot to do a lot of work out, in non-air conditioned facilities. So, as well as the Democrats ruining everything, I don't know if on Twitter just recently, and I replied to it. Someone said words to the effect, the dumbest person in Congress said something intelligent or something like that. And it was, if you know who AOC is, I'm not going to, the left wing chick, we'll call her that, because that's sort of her personality kind of thing. Said something about, lobbyists, big industry. She knows it's going to happen, but predatory gambling, etc. Gambling is bad. It supports addictions. Blah 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 blah. And this was what she said. Big gambling interest. And I used to like the olden days when gambling was sort of in Las Vegas and New Jersey, but now there's casinos everywhere that the Indians run. It's not that I don't like that the Indians run them. It's just maybe it's everywhere. But I replied, the real question is, are people self-governing? Or do you need laws that make gambling illegal, make alcohol illegal, or are they self-governing? If you need to have a law that and I got to, you regulate things, so you regulate alcohol, make sure it's not, it's what it is on the label is what's inside, percentage of alcohol, et cetera, and gambling, you make sure that they're not cheating. You see the roulette wheel and you have that many chances out of the roulette wheel to win, and it's not some sort of rigged machine. And, I don't trust nearly as much, but the video poker and the video slot machines, that they are, doing the rates that they're supposed to be, and so test them. So it's one thing to regulate, but if you've got to make it illegal, and this is also looking at lotteries, looking at like horse race gambling, not just slot machines and roulette wheels, but all the other sorts of gambling in life. If you have to ban them because they're bad for people, and just full disclosure here, I used to go to Las Vegas a lot. I played a lot of blackjack. I probably lost more than I won, but we're talking I would go, for whatever in a trip, lose $100 or $200. It's not like, and it was entertainment money. If I went to Las Vegas shows, of the various, Cirque du Soleil, which I've seen and many years ago now, I'm sure they're all new cast, but, I've seen some of those shows, Blue Man Group and whatnot back in the day. I don't know if that's still going, but, I've seen those. If I went and spent the money on those shows, I would have spent about as much money, and the time that I spent gambling, if I went to the shows, I would have spent about as much money as I did gambling. So, yeah, I don't think that, I have any addictions to gambling, and just sort of, whatever. So the idea, the idea that somebody is incapable of handling it means that it needs to be spoiled for everybody else. Okay, that's bad, because I don't, we got to ban guns because bad people do things with guns. No, let's just lock up all the bad people. And they very quickly won't be doing bad things with guns. But if people need to ban alcohol, like we did in the 1920s with amendments to the Constitution, and and if we need to ban gambling because it harms too many people, well, then democracy itself is a bad thing, because democracy relies upon the ability of people to self-govern. Okay. Now, I will say that in a lot of democracies, the people are lied to. And one of the biggest lies that people are still seeming to believe is communism. I mean, anybody who looks at it should realize communism not only is evil, but just doesn't work. But hey, we keep wanting to go down the communist road. I think a bunch of the people are evil and know that communism doesn't work, but it sounds so good to the certain social economic class, we're going to use it to maintain power. I truly believe a certain amount of it is just, and I'm talking about the people that, get elected to office and whatever, just use it as a lever to get power, and they may or may not truly be communists, but have, at least communist sympathies or leftist sympathies or whatever. If they're not technically Marxist communists, they're some other social left, whatever viewpoint. But that we should know that it doesn't work. Experience, if nothing else, should teach us that it doesn't work. But people getting sold this, and people have been sold lies and lies and lies ever since World War II, and even before, obviously. And the cities have gone so far left. I don't know if humanity is self-governing, can be self-governing. I just don't know. I would like it to be. But if every city is always going to go left, and if every city always destroys itself when it goes left, then obviously there's something wrong. It's just wrong. It used to be a lot of cities, it was the property owners that would, be the people that voted. Most people weren't allowed to vote. I'm not talking just like here in America, I'm talking historically. And so the cities were often much more industrious than the countrysides. The countrysides were often run by nobles. And even if you're talking about a kingdom, which you have kings and, whatever, running the overall government, a lot of the cities had what you might think of as a self-governing situation, but it was the governance of the sort of the two basic classes in there, the merchants and the industrialists, shall we say, which could be, very, hand-making shoes, not necessarily like big industry, but it's not just like one cobbler making one pair of shoes at a time. It'd be somebody owning a business that had all the tools and trained up a bunch of people, and there'd be 10 people making shoes in it. So it's not like it's a big factory, but it's, it's a, a coordinated effort, and it very well may be different people were making different parts of the, process of making the shoe or whatever. And not big because they did have water-powered stuff at times, for like mills, stamping mills and whatnot, grinding mills. I'm not talking, and of course they were primitively making steel, but also making iron. I'm not talking about those sort of bigger operations. I'm talking about just, hand tools, working in a, largish workshop and making stuff like that. It was the leaders of these kinds of groups that were actually running the city, not the people employed in them. And so they made rational choices that were good. And as far as I can tell, every city, or virtually every city, once you put out universal voting, goes left to some degree. Oh, hey, in LA, there's a bunch of Republicans there, more than 1 million. I'm talking LA City, not just greater. More than 1 million Republicans. Now, a bunch of them don't vote because they know they're not going to win, so they don't even bother. But even those that do, a lot of them are passionate, even though they know they're not going to win. It's just that there's a majority that's left. It's not everybody. And so it used to be until Reagan made one of his two big mistakes. And that was his first amnesty program to give amnesty to illegal aliens. But his deal, which they never intended to keep, was this was a one and done. We were going to do amnesty for those that were here, that had been here long enough or whatever it was, and then we were going to close the border. No more illegal aliens coming in and no more amnesties. Well, for California, that shifted the voting demographics just enough that, and it took a little while to fully happen, but that was just enough to doom a conservative state. California had San Francisco, had sort of certain leftist areas, but California was a conservative state that would periodically elect leftists, but was normally running conservative because they were Westerners. They weren't the dirty, filthy, I know some of you are them, the dirty, filthy Easterners that lived in grimy big cities that are, people that are urbanites from Eastern Europe. And this has nothing to do with race, if anybody's starting to think I'm talking about culture. That are people that are dependent upon getting a job, living in an urban center, in sort of the Eastern European kind of situation, that live and run in these cities here. And I'm both figuratively and literally mean sort of dirty and grimy. I mean, that's the way a lot of the stuff is. But out in the West, we had much more of an idea of self-reliance. A lot of the people that moved into these areas, not everybody, no way, but a lot of them were sort of self-reliance. They were going to rely upon themselves. It's not big companies, big cities, big whatever that's got to support me. I'm going to rely upon myself. And a lot of it was, well, hey, if my job quits here, whatever, I'll move to here. I'll move around. People were much, much more mobile. And I see that people are, and I'll get back to the chat in a moment, much more mobile out here, moving around than a lot of the people out here. Now, I've known a bunch of Northeasterners, some of them from New York, that have moved out here. And to a degree, they've adopted, because they're the ones that moved out, moved away from their community, moved out to here. They're the adventurous ones. So it's sort of was, at least in the past, a self-selecting. I'm a third-generation Californian. That's actually rare. And we're even of people that were, American citizens, born American citizens, third-generation Californian for my age is actually quite rare, because I had at least one grandparent that was born in California. Both my parents were born. So and we're talking about, the mobility and the way looking at America. So, yeah, a very big, and this is what, like Obamacare, that I know a lot of people still like, but I hate, is that it was nationalizing the healthcare. We right now have nationalized healthcare. No, it's not government owned, but we have national requirements for healthcare, as opposed to 50 different ones, whether they were completely different or just a little bit different. To like, sometimes you got Maine up here, which is a very spread out state, very few, population centers. That can needs a different system than New Jersey, that is, much closer, much more urbanized, that kind of thing. And big state Texas versus small state, again, like up here, in Connecticut or Rhode Island or whatever, you need different systems, as well as the experiments. Arizona tries one, New Mexico tries a slightly different one, and they can see how they work. And after 10 years, they can compare and contrast what works better or not, and then sort of, learn from the other. So the beauty of all of America is its scale, but also it had been, and the left hates diversity. They want uniformity. Oh, they'll talk about diversity in sexual identity or something, but even there, they want certain uniformities. So the left is always want uniformity, as opposed to having governance and choices made at a more local level. So the more centralized the U.S. becomes, the worse the situation becomes. And so an America that is more decentralized. And now, how does this relate to World War II? It's very important. America had lots and lots of talents. It wasn't a single uniformity of anything. And so you get people with a lot of different backgrounds that can either make up industry, it can make up agriculture, it can make up war fighting, it can make up, different branches, and all of that stuff. America, through railways, as well as through the Panama Canal and shipping back in World War II, was able to very much overcome distance. This was heavily industrialized at the time. California was not. And I mean that literally was not. It had virtually no industry. The two biggest industries that I know of, and I'm a Californian, before World War II was the movie industry. And that was started by a bunch of people that were from basically New York and that sort of area, wanting to make movies all the time. And this was in the silent era. And they shot a lot of even indoor, even in an indoor house setting, they would shoot it outside because in the 1920s, in silent movies, lighting was still a significant issue. So you would build like one or two or two or three walls or something of an interior, house or whatever, and leave the roof off, and be able to take on and off the other walls for where the camera was, and to be able to shoot it. And they wanted it someplace sunny all the time, year round, and very little rain, and also not too hot or too cold or whatever. So the movie industry, which is really not an industry, comes to California. The other industry, for basically the same reasons, maybe not quite so much outside for production, but the aircraft industry comes out here and produces aircraft, because back east, you've got lots of clouds. Back east, you've got lots of rain. You've got winters. How are you going to test fly and fly airplanes? We're talking the 20s and into the 30s. How are you going to do that when you've got a snowstorm? Yeah, people could trudge to work and work in a big hangar making the aircraft. But what are you going to do with that aircraft after you get it made? You got to have hangars for them, maybe. You're just going to put the, early airplanes out in the snow? Yeah, of course they did have, airports in the east for sure. And that's where a lot of the airplanes were actually used in the 20s and the 30s. But you could, oh, hey, we're going to be like a local airlines, whether it's a charter or scheduled or somebody, rich person privately owning. Well, we'll build a hangar, or we'll build 4 hangars or whatever for our airlines, because they, sort of part of the planning process. and will only fly in good weather. Well, you want to test fly, you want to work, so they're coming out here. And that, I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think they were making aircraft engines. This is before World War II, even before the starting to build airplanes for the Western Allies in World War II. This was out here. So the engines were probably built somewhere back east, whether it's Chicago area, New York area, I don't know where the engine, Detroit, wherever the engines were being built, put on trains and sent out here. Now the airframes, were probably the steel and aluminum to some degree were made in the East, and again also shipped out here and assembled. So they were already doing that before World War II starts. Now Kaiser, not the Kaiser, but Kaiser, he's an individual, as you're gearing up for the war, and definitely once the war hits, comes out here and builds industry, basically shipbuilding industry. And a lot of that requires continental, cross-continental shipping of steel, because there was not huge steel plants being built, to my knowledge, in any great scale here in California. There were definitely, somewhere out here, I forget whether it was like Kansas or somewhere out here, I forget that, was it Alcoa or somebody, some aluminum, they do aluminum production. They build an aluminum factory, and they have a rolling, because you I don't know if you know, but you can squeeze out aluminum to make a rolling, to roll out big sheets of aluminum. They build the ability of a mile long, which is less than 2 kilometers, but getting near 2 kilometers, a rolling thing to roll a piece of aluminum a mile long, to roll it along this thing to stretch, you get it sort of thick and you roll it out thinner and thinner and thinner to like make the bodies of the aircraft, the aluminum sheet. Up to a mile long rolling thing is built during World War II, built out here in the Midwest. And it's probably sort of near one of the aluminum production facilities. But alumina comes from either down here, like Jamaica and whatever. It's coming from Africa. I think there's also some coming up from Brazil. So even that is all being, during World War II, is being shipped. The alumina, the sort of powdery material that's mined, is being shipped, and either locally or once it gets into the U.S. is being filtered out from other stuff that's dug up with it, other dirt, other minerals, other whatever with them, is being separated from that, and then it needs a lot of heat and electricity. You actually hit it with electricity to create aluminum, or if you're in Britain, aluminium. Two different words, not different pronunciation, two different words that mean the same thing. But aluminum, you make the aluminum, and then you come up, and it comes out, pours out in ingots. And then you've got to take that into making usable parts, whether it's extrusion, which you're pushing it through a, like if you're the old Play-Doh things, you're pushing it through a mold, or through rolling it out or casting it into particular shapes, and it's all this stuff. And they're building this up during World War II. And that's a massive industry. So then part of the reason they're building it out here is because it's flat, because you can build a big long factory. Part of the reason is there's lots of space out here. You're not trying to build it in a congested city of New Jersey, Newark, or Detroit, or Chicago. You're building it out here where there's not much space. You're also part of it building out here is because you're building aircraft here and you're building aircraft here to go in each way. Again, another story that I know I've told before. My father, basic career, at least all of my remembered life with him, is he worked for the Navy. He was a civilian, but he would work for the Navy Department. One of his jobs for years took him to the Navy base in what is it? Tulsa? No, not was it Tulsa? Oh, oh boy, it was somewhere out in Oklahoma. I don't know if it was Tulsa or no. Oh boy, I forget. I forget exactly. But one of the there was a Navy base here, and he had to come out to the Navy base. Why is there um, a Navy base? Because it's stored, and that was one of the things that he monitored. It stored the ammunition. Probably, I don't know specifically. He didn't talk about specifics because security clearances and whatnot, and so he just stayed away from things like the 16-inch shells for the New Jersey class thing, because it's stored here partially because, well, yeah, nuclear missiles can fly in, but outside of that, it's real easy to secure, a base. From attack here, even a terrorist attack. Easy to monitor, make it big, make a lot of, whether you want to call them killing zones or just observation zones, from, and I'll get to the chat, don't worry, guys. From wherever, a terrorist type attack might come in, because some of these could be nuclear weapons, Tomahawk missiles or whatever, that would be stored there. So any sort of attack, there would be, the ability to see it coming and be able to react to it. So having it out there, and of course you put it near a railhead to be able to ship things out via trains. But this, bases out here that can supply, this is in the Cold War era, can supply both coasts, as well as the Gulf Coast, if you want to separate it out from the East Coast Navy bases. And, so you're centrally locating it. So building a place out here, Norman base. Hello, Bobo Fast. How you doing? That wasn't it. I don't think. If I heard it again, I would know, and I could maybe figure it out, but I don't remember right offhand. I used to travel out there, when I was, older kid, but for like a week at a time, or every other month or something like that. It wasn't, it was a commute job. He would be there maybe a week, and whatever he had to do, and then he would come home. Mostly working, in the LA area, but periodically he would need to travel out there and he shifted jobs a bit over his career within working for the Navy. And so the scale of America, can be a hindrance, but because basically we all speak the same language. Basically, we all have the same culture. It's all an Anglo culture, we call it that. Yeah, I know there's Chinese Americans, there's Mexican Americans, there's, Italian Americans, but as they stayed long enough, they got enculturated into this culture. It's becoming much more ghettoized now. Much. And there's always been a certain amount of ghettoization, and I know those back east know that stuff. And I don't mean black ghettos. I just mean Italian neighborhoods, Polish neighborhoods. You get the picture. It's always been something of that. But I think it's getting more and more. I may be wrong, but I think it's getting more and more. And so since there was enough understanding between all these areas, and without serious political division, a state, Florida, cannot ban stuff coming in from, food or products or whatever coming in from Georgia. Interstate commerce, commerce that's going between two states is regulated by the federal government. So, there isn't, Portugal protecting its agricultural markets from flooding in from Spanish agricultural markets just to protect Portuguese markets. There's none of that within the U.S. That's, gone within the U.S. So it's, by the time we're getting into the 20th century, and definitely the second half, which is coming in, the U.S. is fairly well integrated and very flexible in its ability to shift and move things. So, no, the scale of America does not, in my opinion, hurt the war effort. We use trains more than you Europeans use trains here in America. we have more passenger rail today in operation, or rails that have passenger trains on it, in the U.S. today for passenger rail than you do in Europe. Now, we probably have a lot fewer people riding the trains per day in Europe. It's just passenger rail doesn't quite. Here it makes a lot of sense because, if you're Joe Biden and you're a senator from New Jersey and you need to get down to Washington, well, you either got to fly, you got to drive, or you got to take trains. Those are your three basic. I guess in theory, you could take a boat or whatever, but in theory, those are your three real choices. Well, even before 9/11, it was still a hassle to get on enough airplanes. If you're rich like him, you could have a driver that drives you, or the train. And both of the, I've been to Newark a long time ago, but a lot of these areas, I've been to Washington, D.C., spent about a week there once. They're densely populated and packed cities. So you don't, take a few taxi cabs. You don't necessarily need a car once you get to where you're going. So yeah, a train makes a certain amount of sense here, for passengers. Out here, it makes no sense. Virtually no sense. But for moving freight, it makes a lot of sense. We move a lot on trains. Okay, let me get to all the comments here before I get back to going with the thing. Okay, freedom movement. Okay, that's where we were. Okay, what do you think is causing America not to have such vitality it once had industry? Of late, it seems the MIC has forgotten its quality on its own. Well, that's a deep question. One, there was a belief, because I was taught it in school, that Americans will always outdo everybody else just because we're Americans. And so that foreign competition only will make us stronger. We'll come up with a better way than whether it's the Chinese or the, Taiwanese, Thailand or Australia or Germany. And yeah, the American steel industry was old. It was either World War II or pre-World War II. So yeah, it should all fail and be reborn. It should be fail because of German or Korean steel competition. This is before China was a thing in the international trade when I was going to school. Yeah, the old Rust Belt should fail. But the competition of Germany and Korea and whatnot and China and Japan at the time will just make us do better and come with a better way. That whether the company fails or the company shuts down the old steel plant and builds the new, modern, better than Germany's, better than Korea's, and we'll do it even better than everybody else because we're Americans, that's actually best. And this was even from a right-wing perspective. It's, Darwinism as economics. They would call it capitalism, free market, but they see it as Darwinism, as the weak, the old, the out of date will fail and the new will rise above. Well, there's multiple reasons that doesn't work. But it also doesn't work when you have entrenched unions. Yes, unions in the 19th and early 20th century really helped getting working conditions to be good. But to a point, the unions pull up the ladder behind them. Meaning, once, I knew a guy who was a longshoreman. Worked in, I forget whether it was Port of Long Beach or Port of LA. There are two ports right next to each other, but worked there. Once you get into that job, you're making huge money. but it is near impossible to get into that job. They protect how many people are in that union. And if anybody tries to hire somebody not in that union, they'll strike, they'll not just like they quit. No, they'll try to block access to your facilities. They will do industrial sabotage to teach them owners to just use our union people. And so the unions would literally cut their own throats. They, like California, if in certain industries you have to join a union, it's basically by law. You have to join a union if you're going to work in certain industries. If you're going to work in a grocery store, you've got to join a union. You cannot not join a union. And that may work in California because the grocery store is a local need. You can't have a grocery store in Texas serving people in California unless you're doing home delivery. But so in states with right to work states, these kind of states down here, compared to union states up here, industry is heading down here because you have the right to work. So it's partially the unions are the problem. Partially it's ideological. There's many reasons people out there want, whether it's America to fail, industry to fail. You got Greta Thunberg out there. Yay, environmentalist, who's now become an Islamicist. She is trying to get more oil shipped into Cuba. I thought she was against oil. Just quit oil. Cuba's quitting oil. Cuba's not going to have any more oil. We can see how a society without oil gets to function. All the solar and wind power they need. They can, put up sails on top of their old cars and move them around with wind power. So yeah. Partly it's just various ideological. So the U.S., I would say, is teetering on the brink. I think it's going to come back, but you can go so far and you lose your, and this is probably maybe not the best word, but your spirit. Whether it's your spirit of can do, or your spirit of industrialization, or your workforce habits, or whatever, it's been teetering on the brink. I think it's going to come back. I think the people in charge, and I've changed my mind on this. The U.S. doesn't need to make all of its steel. It doesn't. But it needs to make somewhere, and I don't have a hard line, but somewhere between 40 and 60% of its steel. It needs to make internally. And it also needs to make all the types of steel it needs. Because you can have low quality, high quality, high density for like armor on a tank, or steel that can deal with very high temperatures versus steel that's just sort of regular steel. An I-beam. Yeah, that's why if you fly an airplane full of jet fuel into a skyscraper, I-beams aren't designed for steel that does high temperatures. But at least on the liners or whatever, on cylinders, on engine blocks, they're designed to be able to take high temperatures, that kind of thing. So, it may, if you melt the whole building out of that for, the World Trade Center towers, had you build it out of the right type of steel, it might have been able to take the heat. I'm not a metallurgist to know all the different temperatures and how hot that got, but you can definitely make it so that you can handle more heat. But maybe it might be too brittle for the flexibility needed for that big skyscraper. So we need to be able to make all the types of steel or whatever, and I'm just looking at the steel industry, that America needs, not make all of it that they need for all the one type, but be able to make all the types so we're not dependent. Because it doesn't necessarily need to say go to war with somebody, but it could be a war breaks out like in the Ukraine versus Russia. That might happen someday, and trade through this part of the world might shut down. So if we were dependent upon, or if somebody else is dependent upon stuff from this part of the world, it might not get through. So the U.S. needs to make like all of their steel, all of the types of steel they need, and make somewhere between 40 and 60% of this steel needs. It can import some steel. It can import a lot of steel, but it needs to make its own steel and at scale so it's reasonably economic. So whether it's through laws or tariffs or whatever, that needs to happen. So competition can be good so that steel doesn't become too expensive because you can't, like if you made a law, you can't import steel. Well, then the steel manufacturers, we can charge whatever we want. And even if the government says, you can't make too much profit off it, well, we've got to pay our union workers $10 million a day because that's what they demand, and, or whatever. You got to have a certain level of competition to do things well. But you also have to protect the industry from its collapse. So everything's a balance. So hopefully I've answered that. Students and university teachers are Marxist useful idiots. Yes, Spiraling, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Does that not imply whether you are right or left, there will be tendencies to authoritarianism since it seems to be need to regulate their views, the lies? Well, okay. I could bring out one YouTuber's name who's almost all YouTubers are bigger than I am. But he's often bemoaning, and I've heard several other YouTubers also. We used to have just the news that told the truth. And things were good. Now all this divisive stuff. And these people are probably old-time centrists, if you will. Might go swing a little bit Democrat, a little bit Republican, to be generally Democrat, old-school Democrat types. Used to be they all lied the same. They all regulated everything the same. Walter Cronkite was a communist, if you didn't know. He sabotages the Vietnam War effort. But it's all was presented as the truth. But I knew it wasn't at the time. I saw the lies because I did have access to things, and I was particularly looking at events outside of the U.S. through alternative media sources back at the time, before the internet really existed, before www existed, for sure, literally before that existed. And back in the days when the internet was really just sort of the government and certain defense contractors using it. Not even any porn on it at the time, So, back in the day, that I knew these people were lying. It used to be the three big networks in America, and then all the AP and Reuters and all these other networks all just continued the same lie. Now, they weren't radical leftists in that they were trying to cause revolution. They were progressive communists. Yeah, Walter Cronkite wasn't one of the people out there wanting to get a Molotov cocktail and go throw it at Nixon's government. Well, maybe Nixon's, but Ford or LBJ, who was a very conservative Democrat. LBJ was from Texas. Democrat, yes. Populist, yes. Leftist, I would say no. That's just LBJ. Lyndon Baines Johnson, if you don't know, the former president of the United States, I'm referring to there. No, but Cronkite wasn't wanting to go, burn down the government for them. He was a progressive communist. He wanted to make progress towards it. So they used to have the coherent lie. Now, back to the 19th century, before news was, newspapers particularly is what I'm saying, before newspapers were heavily industrialized, when you had printing machines that would print efficiently, but not these huge, big You can see them in the 1930s and 1950s movies, and they do clips of newspapers just running off at 300 a minute or something, not all folded and ready to go, just huge, we're printing out, start the presses, stop the when presses were like, hey, we're getting out 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever copies in a day, we're running it, there's 20 newspapers in the city of New York or Chicago or something, and there's 5 newspapers in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The newspapers would have often a political party, right and or left, and in the region that they support, they were constantly fighting and arguing with each other, saying, well, this newspaper, whatever, the Times of Times of Georgia or whatever, lies about this, and the Times of Georgia would say the Telegraph of Georgia lies about, no, they're telling the lies, and they would argue with each other, and it was going on and on and on. And so that's used to be in the 19th century. The media, and if you look back at the stuff, it's often just all kinds of stuff going on. It used to be that way. And it's not until the internet that's broken the news monopolies, that went from newspapers, which continued until the 80s, radio, which starts obviously in sort of the 20s, and then television after that gets added onto it. It isn't until the internet that breaks that monopoly that you don't necessarily, it hadn't been regulated in the US, but it had been conformed by interest. Okay, do you think the current merchant business class still rational? Peter Thiel of Palantir, they seem to support surveillance state akin to 1984. I am worried about the surveillance state. That's definitely an issue. I'm on team Elon Musk. Not that I, 100% agree. You want to pull something out of what he actually says or something. I might disagree with. It's not, so don't hit me with something that you agree with. Whatever, I don't know, but I'm on team Elon Musk from his philosophy standpoint of the big industrialist. I'm on his team, if you will. Hey, Elon, can I be a promoter of? No, but I wouldn't be good enough. He likes successful people. But I am not pro-democracy, people. If you're new around here and haven't heard it before. That doesn't mean I don't want representation within government. But I'm against democracy. Democracy is bad. And remember, Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato all hated democracy. Now, Plato was a totalitarian nut job, but Aristotle was a reasonable sort of guy. So I like Aristotle. Governments, once you get to the idea of government, okay, there's the old world or the ancient world. Maybe we'll call it the ancient. There was the ancient world, but we'll put that aside for the moment. And I'm looking at Europe specifically. So the ancient world falls with the Dark Ages. And don't let these neo-historian Marxists try to go, oh, the Dark Ages, no, that's just early middle. No, Dark Ages. Over 90% or maybe 99% of literature is gone, is just gone because of the fall of the previous world. It is a Dark Age. Oh, but look at this little art thing. They were making crafts, Viking, what? Yeah, sure. There was some... But you look at the buildings from Roman Britain to Dark Age Britain, it's a dark age. But coming out of the dark age through the Middle Ages, there is no government. And I will go with that because, and I actually saw an interview with a woman an American woman, who studies the Italian Renaissance political situation, being in there partially, not just, but partially about Niccolo Machiavelli. And she very much describes how and why things go very well. I don't know. She's probably a communist, but she was actually very brilliant in her analysis of stuff. But you very much, and this was it Machiavelli or one of the people says, it is very dangerous to be rich and not powerful. Okay? You had to be rich and powerful. And powerful meant people with swords. You know, it's not just, oh, hey, you know, I'm Elon Musk, I have, you know, lots of industry. No, you had to be powerful and rich. Or if you're going to be, because otherwise somebody with power, if you had power without riches, you could take it from somebody who did not have power but had wealth. So the wealth and government were unified. This is why the myth of Robin Hood, of rob from the rich and give to the poor. Yeah, he was sort of doing that, but the rich was also sort of the government. He was robbing from the government and giving to the people. Because there was not, you know, and this is, you know, talked about, and this goes actually back to the classical era, but goes through the up to the Middle Ages period. A tax collector. They would figure out, oh, this area, you know, whether it's a town, a countryside region, a small city, or whatever, this area, that, you know, should, you know, I'll just use modern things. $10,000 should be raised from that. Okay. You got to do it. So a tax collector would have to go in there and get $10,000. But if he can get $13,000 or $15,000 or $20,000, he could keep the extra. Okay. He just had to squeeze the tax out of the area that is set up to have, you know, because it might be, you know, he might sit around and, you know, all of the farmers bring in their grain to be turned into wheat or whatever, and take his percentage of it. You know, oh, he gets to take 10% or 20% or whatever it was. But so if he didn't show up for a few days and somebody, you know, ground more grain than they claimed or something like that, no, he had to squeeze it out. And they couldn't legally get more than the percent that he was supposed to do it. But the more efficiently he collects taxes, any extra over the expected amount for whatever area he was tax collecting, he got to keep. So the rich and the government were one and the same. And this is when you're talking about that for like the city states, and that they're generally, and sometimes they were city states, as in something of a political entity unto themselves. Sometimes they were just, you know, a borough, which, you know, was a licensed city, like in Britain or whatever, or at least up in Scotland. That's why there's Edinburgh, Jedburgh, all these other things, because these were licensed cities or towns or whatever you want to call them, but they were licensed. And they had, in that license, a certain amount of self-governance within it. So the local lords couldn't tell the town what to do unless they showed up with an army or something, because, you know, obviously they would revolt or whatever, you know. But, you know, so that it was the elites of the towns that were sort of governing under the license of the king, and under the license of the king, they had to, you know, provide taxes and whatnot. And so, and heaven forbid, you know, this is even in a monarchy, you lose your license, because then, of course, somebody like the local lords get to come and take everything away from you because you don't have a license to be there anymore. So, but once you get into governance as separate, you know, from the elites, things change. And So now we have Peter Thiel. Now we have Jeff Bezos. And now we have Elon Musk. Now those are famous partially and are so powerful is because they are creators of their particular thing. I was some video on YouTube talking about microslop and how bad Microsoft is right now, and one of the thumbnail used I blank on names for some reason. Bill Gates's face there, and Bill Gates warned them or something about this. So I did a quick little Google search, the AI thingy. Bill Gates has almost nothing to do with Microsoft today. Okay. He owns 4% of Microsoft. I don't know. He might be the biggest owner of Microsoft, but only 4%. The board of Microsoft is probably pretty large, the board of directors. So he might, say, control a board member on Microsoft. Saying as if there are 20 board members. I don't know how many there are, but if there's 20 board members, okay, 4% is near 5%, and so that gets you, one board member or something. But he doesn't, he has very little to say over Microsoft. I remember watching a video about rich elites up in the Northeast of America, made back in the 90s, I think it was, a documentary. And they were interviewing some of these rich elites. One of them name was Johnson. Well, if you're sort of an American, you probably know the name Johnson & Johnson. They are a major industry that makes like bandages. You cut your hand, a little Band-Aid. They're sort of the creators of the Band-Aid. Well, and this one, this guy, he's so rich, his father encouraged it. You got to have some sort of, hobby. So his hobby was collecting old maps. Oh, $30,000 for that map? Cool. I'll buy it, very rich. But he owned virtually no Johnson & Johnson stock. He talked about he always wanted to be able to go into the factory and see what was going on in there because he'd drive by it periodically. But he has virtually no association with the company. The powerful people of Johnson & Johnson for the industry was the CEO of the company and the CFO and these other things. So given time, the Peter Thiels, the Bill Gateses, the Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musks will go away because that industry, whatever that industry is, will mature. And yeah, their descendants may be rich, but if you look at within 3 to 5 generations, most of them go back to being more or less normal people. Wealth doesn't maintain well in America long term. And these big companies will be held by either institutions like union pensions or other holders of large groups of stock, sometimes mutual funds, that then there'll also be lots of individual holders of these things. So I know we talk a lot about, whether it's Peter Thiel or Elon Musk. Yeah, those are the individuals that are remarkable. They've created this new thing, but probably in 50 years from now, there'll be the more Lee Iacocca's. I don't know if you remember that, anybody old enough to remember that name. He was, the CEO of General Motors. And other guys that they'll be rich, they'll be wealthy, but they won't, they may own, I may own 4% of the, General Motors stock or something or whatever, but they won't be these titans that we see today. At least most of them won't be. So I don't see that as the issue. I see it as property holders, which could be literally land, but it could also be business owners, stock, significant owners of stock, own $1 million or more in stocks. It doesn't have to be in one company, it can be spread around. Those type of people, and which can be, if you were to go back to needing property owners to be in qualification of ownership, it can be something that prove ownership of something other than just land. And then so you're making rational choices. Because if the economy collapses, that you have a huge chunk of land, it's meaningless, okay? If there's no, a lot of American colonists, hey, they owned huge amounts of land. It's all trees. Well, trees are valuable. Yeah, in Europe they're valuable because there's a lot of need for them in Europe. In America, there's too many trees. We don't have enough people to cut them down. I'm talking in the colonial period. So trees and wood and whatnot aren't valuable. Now, cut wood, before they had large sawmills, cut wood to be useful in building houses or building ships, that becomes valuable because it had the labor added to it. But just because you owned a bunch of land and trees that you can't grow food on because it's filled with trees, you got to go cut down the trees and pull out the tree stumps. That's going to take a lot of labor. So you can be land rich and actually very poor. I mean, like dirt poverty poor, and go, yeah, but I've got 5,000 acres over here. Yeah, but I got to go scrabble around through the dirt for my next meal, and my clothes are 5 years old or 10 years old, and I'm dirty, looking like So, if I owned a lot of I don't know, IBM stock or Microsoft stock, and that company goes out of business tomorrow, I might be able to sell the stock for, because there's still value, because when they sell up the business and they clear it out, there's still some value. But if I owned a lot of that, I don't. But if I did, I'll get 5 cents on the dollar from what I bought it for. Oh, great. I bought it for $100. I'll get $5 back. So if I make decisions on how I vote that destroy the economy, then my value goes away. Now, if I make bad decisions, that make labor so unhappy that they vote in laws that destroy things, it's all a balance. It's all a trade-off. So that's sort of what, that's how I look at it. Okay, I know I said hi before, but Bobus fat, I guess. I don't know. Hello, good to see you here. Makes sense. People used to be more flexible and resilient. Living in cities makes them dependent on government. Well, cities, by their very nature, create specialization, create interdependency. I used to, when I lived in, the LA area, I lived in an apartment. Now, fortunately, my apartment just had 4 units, but whenever they did some work on and it was, small owner, I knew the owner of the building, actually knew him, not just knew who he was, but talked to him and knew him a bit. At some point they did some work, but then the tenants above me that later moved in, they would fill the bathtub up, and then I think put their kids or something in the bathtub, and then that would overflow. But they didn't do the overflow right when the workers did the thing, and eventually because my bathroom was right below it, the ceiling collapsed because too much water was coming over time, and it just got wet, and it just all of a sudden came down. Fortunately, it didn't destroy any of my book collection or anything else because it just started in the bathroom. And it took them a few days, and they really scrambled to repair everything on my level, the maintenance people. But I was sort of dependent upon what the people upstairs did and whatnot. Now that I'm living out in the countryside, unless the neighbors are going to light everything on fire and get all the trees and whatnot and everything going on fire, almost nothing they can do can, if they make a lot of noise on the house next door, they're actually building an extension, so periodically it is noisy over there. But that's just some hammering and whatnot. But mostly what they do doesn't affect me. So it's a lot different. And so yes, okay, each state versus state comparison reminds me of modern China. Actually, seems provinces of China compete more than the U.S. Each province. Yeah, I know there is some of that. Yes, but Bethlehem Steel, Alcoa was aluminum. Yes. So let me see. Okay, can't make proper lithography machines. Yes. Oh, that's all going on in China. Yes. The stuff you just can't make better. You need an infrastructure and proof of talented people, not just import them. Yeah, everything. Yeah, on that, you can't always just do things better. Hello, Paula Day Punch. Good to have you here. I don't see many Americans working in the steel mills today with all of your art degrees. Well, this is what I say. Bobo's fat. America's on the brink. If it were to go one more generation with all the art majors and accessory, etc., and all of the feminization of education, one more generation, and I think could kill it, turn us into Europe, and Europe is in bad shape. But I think there is still hope. There are still enough people of my generation alive. There's still enough people of the younger generations that are, out in this part of the world. They can pull it back from the brink. We can build the steel mills. We're building in Arizona. Arizona is going to become one of the major chip production centers of the world. And specifically, I did click on Phoenix because driven by some of the major fabs that are being built there. And I think they're going to get the highest level of production there eventually that TSMC can make. And TSMC is making factories here. TSMC realizes that it can't just do production capability in Taiwan isn't big enough. Long-term capabilities isn't big enough for the needs. It can't just use, oh, hey, US, protect us because you need our chips entirely. That's partially true, yes, but it can't just do that. And the growing potential markets for chips are going to continue to grow, that if they don't grow into other regions, they won't do it. And there was a lot of controversy over the work hours. This is one of the reasons why I think why they pick Arizona and not someplace like California, is that they can more easily do like 12-hour shifts because of the work process. And yes, give maybe for the Americans, instead of working 5 days a week or whatever you might in Asia with 12-hour shifts, give them a 3-day weekend or whatever to compensate for it. That it's necessary to not just make them in Taiwan, that eventually they would get out competed, just again because Taiwan is only going to be able to make so much chips. I'm not saying it's exhausted its expansion right now, but you can only go so far with whatever particular industry. And so if Taiwan falls, TSMC ownership elements, as well as maybe some of the work elements, might be able to flee at some stage. And if they own assets outside of Taiwan in a more secure country like the US, if China comes in and nationalizes the, industry inside of Taiwan, if they, invade or something, they might be able to escape, or their children or somebody else might be able to escape, and they would still have ownership of the industry outside of the US. So I don't see that there's any serious problem with that. And if you listen to Elon Musk, and I don't know that he's wrong, he's going to soon, he believes, be able to have a robot that is human-like that is not necessarily a droid, and I'm sort of using that term to, and again, droid comes from the word android, which is sort of a humanistic thinking robot as opposed to just a pre-programmed robot. A dynamic thinking robot. But you don't have to have something that's going to be able to talk philosophy with you or wants to have a robot revolution. It just gets its whatever level of fulfillment out of completing the task that it's designed and programmed to do. But it can think to a degree, meaning it doesn't just keep doing the same thing even if it's not working right. It knows to shut things down or whatever. That there'll be huge numbers of these, and these will handle so much labor. So you very well may have big robots, that are specialized, that are literally like a truck or a thing, a machine that loads a truck, and I'm talking like huge truck, not like a diesel truck. I mean like huge trucks that you pour in, that some of these things that, lots of iron or lots of whatever, big things, that may be robotic that just have that task and aren't not necessarily, have a human driving place that then has a robot in it that drives the thing with the steering wheel, but have it, programmed into the truck, designed into the truck. That we may be heading towards that future, and I think we are. So it doesn't matter if there's enough Americans that want to go work in a steel mill. We may have robots that can handle that steel mill. And so, and I can't plan for that yet because that is not yet a reality, and at what level and how effective that will be. The idea of having a truck that drives from one point to another point in a factory, yeah, we can already do that. So some automated systems within the factory, and a truck that, because we can see with some of the stuff, that could see that there's a person in the way, or there's just a big obstacle in the way, and whether to drive around it, or if it doesn't have a drive around it path, to stop. So it's not like going to, squish people or flip itself over just because it's told to go in, this direction and it's going to flip it. No, something that's going to rationalize about to be able to go around things. And if for some reason it can't, it's supposed to stop and wait or stop until, something changes. So, yeah, I don't see that as a serious problem long term. But we have to set up a system that has domestic production. Long term, I don't know how we're going to deal with whether we call it the robot or the droid revolution that's coming. And I think it's coming. Whether it's going to be like Buck Rogers in the 21st Century, if you know that old TV series, which were governed by little AI things, but in a very positive way, or whether it's going to be Terminator and that they want to kill us all. I don't know that answer. I don't have that answer, but I think that's the way we're going. We rob from the rich and give to ourselves. Okay, I get that reference. I don't know specifically what other than you creating it there. Elon is certainly more benign, haha. Well, I'm like, yeah, I watched a very interesting 3-hour interview with him recently in the last few weeks. But he's on Team People as opposed to Team Fewer People. Bill Gates has spent tens of millions, if not hundreds or billions, of trying to reduce humanity's population. Oh, most of it is in like African, birth control. But I think his ideology would be, if we have to, we'll set up death camps. I think that's Bill Gates. Bill Gates is a Malthus. If you know who Malthus was, an English guy back in the 19th century. Elon Musk is an opposite to the Malthus. So, yes. That's why I'm certainly on Team Elon Musk until I find a better option. Okay, German-Italian technology treaty. An excellent suggestion. Germany technology. Yeah, we're not going down the road, Italy. Sorry. I know you have focus trees and other things that push into German cooperation, but we've decided not to go down that path. Okay, so we've done some, we'll do a few more. Some other areas with some anti-aircraft. Okay, that'll do. Okay, better German machine guns. Okay, we'll do that. It'll help us make garrison divisions to have some police units attached to smaller divisions, maybe. I don't know. I know there's also the garrisoning mechanic, but they both work to reduce insurrection levels. Uh-oh. There's justification going on against us or allies. So if you... Ah, wow, this is interesting. The Soviet Union is trying to justify war against us. Why would they do that? Aren't we in a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union here? How can they be justifying a war against us? Again, I didn't look at all the exact areas, but I do believe Oberbayern, right? Yeah, you want to make sure before you do this to have at least Austria, if not Czechoslovakia, part. Okay, the Netherlands joins the Allies. Man, this game sucks. How do you have the Netherlands joining the Allies? Seriously. How do you seriously think you can do that? Okay, I think we can deploy a couple of divisions here and get that going. I'm serious. Have you read any history, people? Yeah, I know the war hasn't started and all, and so things are a bit different. How do you get not the Belgians, but get the Dutch in an alliance? Most of these are like Commonwealth Dominion type regions, and fine, yeah, I mean, but okay, we can finally do this. 70 days, and I don't. Again, it wasn't 70 days after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It was like 2 weeks or something. I don't know the exact count of days, but yeah, bad history. Okay. Bad history. Okay, guys. Well, I think we've had fun here today. We'll see about starting the war next time and see how it goes. Not that we... I don't know. This is going to be interesting. So I want to thank Holiday Punch, SW, Bobo's Fat, I think is how that's supposed to be done. Bobo's Fat. Spiraling. Dutov Devlich. Hope I'm getting that close to correct. Arno, who I hope is still here. And Jamnuska, who was here, and Tubies, if you're still around. Thank you for hanging out with me. It's been fun playing. I should be back tomorrow, hopefully with Arno, playing some War Thunder. And Monday, 8 a.m. my time, I'm going to be playing Panzer Corps 2 for Slytherin. Something may be up with that, but you'll have to see if you show up for that. I can't really say much more than that. I don't mean not allowed to. I mean I can't. I know something's sort of up, but I don't really know what. So yes, thank you all for hanging out with me. I will see you hopefully tomorrow, if not sometime after that. Thanks, everybody.